My name is Tyler Thompson, and this is the presentation of my final paper for Anthropology 242, Native Cultures of Alaska. Throughout my paper, I focused on the qualities of two vastly different knowledge systems. The two systems I want to focus on are the indigenous and Western knowledge systems. Although the two systems are quite different, the successful integration of the two proves beneficial for both indigenous people and Western society. As Barnhart and Coagley states, there is a need to reconstruct the relationship between indigenous people and the immigrant societies in which they are embedded. My paper highlighted the tension between the two systems and the need to develop an educational system that fosters the integration and understanding of two diverse systems to strengthen them as a whole. I will compare and contrast indigenous knowledge system and Western science to illustrate the potential that a mutually combined system possesses. It is important to understand that indigenous people often have a unique way of looking at and relating to the world that surrounds them. To illustrate this point, we will look at the Yupiaq people. Coagley goes into great detail describing the Yupiaq outlook and lifestyles. Doing so, it becomes very clear that their worldview differs drastically from that of Western civilization. One significant difference Coagley describes is how the environment in which Yupiaq people live requires them to have a vast array of empirical knowledge, survival skills, and efficient food gathering and storage abilities. To help them achieve these things, the Yupiaq have developed an outlook of nature as metaphysic, meaning the Yupiaq live in the world that is equally aware, and they are amongst spirits of their ancestors as well as those of animals, plants, hills, winds, lakes, and rivers. Differences in outlook and lifestyles are important to identify because the Yupiaq people's systems of education, governance, spirituality, economy, being, and behavior were very much in conformity with their philosophy of life and provide for a harmonious living. According to Barnhart and Coagley, indigenous people have constructed their traditional education processes based on their observations and interactions with the world to survive. Through demonstration, observation, and thoughtful stories, these lessons are passed on to younger generations. Also, through direct experience with the natural world, indigenous people come to acquire their knowledge. The importance of demonstration, observation, thoughtful storytelling, and direct experiences with the natural world can be seen in the culture camp discussed by Anth Reardon. Attempt to preserve the Yupik way of life, the Calista Elders Council, CEC, took action and sponsored a 10-day culture camp run by 5 elders from Tooksuk Bay and Nightmute. The camp was held in Yukamute, where the elders worked with 20 children ranging from 10 to 14 years of age from surrounding villages. This was a camp where children learned to live and function with the tides and weather, and learned the traditional Yupik way of life. The children participated in traditional activities such as clamming, fishing, preparing seal gut, stringing nets, and cleaning and preparing fish. After a busy day, the evenings were reserved for what is referred to as elder time, where the children sat in a circle where elders spoke to them in Yupik and translated for those who were not fluent in the native language. During this time, one elder explained that they have all gathered at the camp for the purpose of learning about our way of life and Yupik ways, about how they tried to live and how man provided for himself. We came here to be speakers because we wanted you to know about these things, to give you advice to remember later in life. Finup Reardon discusses the importance of being a good listener and taking what you learned and putting it in your pocket for a later date. As we can see, this knowledge system relies upon demonstration, observation, thoughtful storytelling, and the direct experiences to transfer knowledge. Although the emphasis was on good listening and careful attention to the instructions that were received, the youngsters also were encouraged to carefully observe and participate in activities, to handle what they could handle. They were expected to learn for themselves, trying what they were shown. The driving force behind Western civilization has been people who value progress and growth of their society. With the Industrial Revolution and now the countless technological advances, the Western world has expanded across the globe. While indigenous people have traditionally acquired their knowledge through their experiences with the world around them, Western science and education emphasize compartmentalized knowledge that is often decontextualized and taught in the detached setting of a classroom or laboratory. Competency marks another difference between the Western and indigenous knowledge systems. Western competency is often assessed based on predetermined notions of what someone should know and then measured indirectly through different forms of objective tests. Barnhart and Coagley address the concern that this approach simply does not address whether the individual is capable of putting the knowledge into practice. This contradicts the indigenous knowledge system where competency is linked to survival or extinction. If one fails as a caribou hunter, the entire family is in jeopardy. One either has or does not have requisite knowledge and is tested in the real-world context, as stated by Barnhart and Coagley. Formal Western schooling came to southwestern Alaska in the 18th and 19th centuries with the Russian Orthodox Church. According to Timothy E. Jester, the United States has historically utilized the education system as an instrument to eradicate traditional Alaska Native culture. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the United States took a colonial approach to schooling, forming the foundation on which our contemporary system is built. Jester describes this system as one that has consistently failed to provide Alaska Natives with a culturally relevant as well as effective education according to standardized test scores, dropout and graduation rates, and educational attainment levels. A clear lack of concern for cultural relevance in schools can be seen in the late 1800s when boarding school approach had been institutionalized in Alaska. The historical function of Native boarding schools were to remove Alaska Native students from their home villages and civilize them to the superior culture of Western civilization. One charter school director stated, "In my opinion, the only plan by which these people can be raised to some degree of civilization is through the establishment of good boarding schools, where the children can be taught, besides English speaking, reading, and writing, some kind of work calculated to promote their welfare and home comfort. The children should be removed as far as possible from contact and association with the elder ones of their race, those who imagine that a few years of preaching and teaching in day schools will suffice to civilize and Christianize wild native tribes are, in my opinion, greatly mistaken." Although Alaska Native students are no longer required to attend boarding schools, Alaska utilizes a statewide standards-based system that caters to Western knowledge systems, as opposed to the indigenous knowledge systems presented above. The immigrant society that Alaska Natives had become embedded in do not understand or do not care to understand their indigenous knowledge system. Let's take a look at the qualities associated to traditional indigenous knowledge systems. These include holistic, physical and metaphysic world linked to moral code emphasis on practical application of skills and knowledge, trust or inherited wisdom, respect for all things, practical experimentation, qualitative oral record, local verification, communication or metaphor, communication of metaphor and story connected to life, values, and proper behavior, and integrated and applied to daily living and traditional subsistence practices. Compare those to the qualities associated with Western science, including part to whole, limited to evidence and explanation with physical world, emphasis on understanding how, skepticism, tools expand scale of direct and indirect observation and measurement, hypothesis falsification, global verification, quantitative written record, communication of procedures, evidence and theory, discipline-based, micro and macro theory, and mathematical models. When you look at these qualities together, it becomes a little clearer as to why such a negative history has developed between Alaska Natives and Western civilization. Their worldviews simply do not align and present Alaska Natives with a difficult situation to resolve. When focusing on indigenous education, earlier literature typically revolved around finding a way to westernize the native people, but until recently very little has been written about the opposing argument. Just as it is important to understand the indigenous people's unique worldview, it is important that Western science try to understand and consider indigenous knowledge systems in their own right. Barnhart and Coagley state that Native people may need to understand Western society, but not at the expense of what they already know and the way they have come to know it. Non-Native people, too, need to recognize the coexistence of multiple worldviews and knowledge systems, and find ways to understand and relate to the world in its multiple dimensions and varied perspectives. In order for indigenous knowledge systems to understand and relate with Western knowledge systems, we must not dwell on the qualities that separate the two, but more importantly identify and utilize the areas where they share common ground. According to Barnhart and Coagley, the two systems share the following qualities: unified universe, body of knowledge stable but not subject to change, honest and inquisitiveness, perseverance, open-mindedness, empirical observation in nature in natural settings, pattern recognition, verification through repetition, inference and prediction, plant and animal behavior, cycles, habitat needs, interdependence, properties of objects and materials, positions and motion of objects, cycles and changes in earth and sky. Understanding the differences and common ground allow educators to differ from different perspectives to create culturally responsive curriculum. According to Barnhart and Coagley, this type of curriculum can generate three powerful results. The first is the student might conceivably develop all of the common ground skills and understanding while working from and enhancing a traditional knowledge base. The second is the acquisition of common ground, regardless of route is a significant accomplishment. And third, it is that exploration of a topic through multiple knowledge systems can only enrich perspective and create thoughtful dialogue. According to Barnhart and Coagley, indigenous people have only just begun to redefine their social roles by blending the old with the new, and stresses the importance of breaking out of the one system mindset. It appears that only through mutual respect and collaboration can we overcome the historical imbalance that has taken place in Alaska's education system. This imbalance that has been growing since the point of contact with Alaska Natives can only be overcome by a mutual understanding and activism on both indigenous and Western knowledge systems. Without mutual understanding and activism, we risk endangering the unique qualities that separate the indigenous and Western knowledge systems. You're listening to my presentation, and have a good day.